Hey guys, I thought today I would bring you a little video about mirror match tips and tricks, just to help you gain a little bit of an edge in those mirror matches that you're probably going to be playing a fair amount of, things like the Great Swords mirror or the Alchemy mirror and stuff like that. So yeah, I just thought I'd give you a few tips and tricks about that. So what is a mirror match? Well, we're talking about when you're playing against the same deck that you're playing, basically. And some of this stuff might be fairly obvious to experienced players, but hopefully it will help some of the beginners out there. And I figured I hadn't really talked about the subject of mirror matches at all on this channel, and figured I could just throw up a bit of a beginner helping tip and trick thing onto the channel to deal with that. So let's jump right into it. So the first thing about mirror matches that's really important to keep in mind is the ability to dry pass, and this is passing when you have the blue coin, i.e. you're going first in the game. This before you even play a card. Now this is really an important thing to be able to do and have confidence in doing in mirror matches because, well, you're playing the same deck against your opponent. So if you pass round one, it's very unlikely in a lot of situations that your opponent is going to be able to, 2-0 your deck because they're also playing the same deck. So if your deck has any weaknesses or issues that might arise from going straight to round two, then their deck will also have those issues, right? So, for example, if you're playing ointments, for example, yeah, in alchemy, the opponent's also going to play ointments, so you're less worried about not being able to revive cards in round two. Therefore, dry pass is a bit safer. Now, there's a few caveats to dry passing in mirrors. Pretty much all the time, it's fine to do. With any deck, effectively, if you know that for sure you're playing against an opponent with the same deck. There are a few exceptions. Number one, you definitely want like a good hand. If your hand is completely terrible, like garbage cards, lots of cards you can't use in round two, resurrect effects or whatever, no golds, stuff like that, then you might think about not passing and instead trying to get some of your bad cards out of the hand, trying to set up some carryover maybe to help you out, that sort of thing. But yeah, that's the first situation where you might not be able to dry pass on the blue coin. Otherwise, the other situation is if you don't have your spy in hand and you think you'd be vulnerable to being bled by the opponent having their spy. Now, this isn't too common of an issue because if you get bled as your deck and you're playing against the mirror, then they're basically bleeding you down to the same situation, right? You're both going to have the same finisher cards in hand once you've been bled out. So usually you can dry pass even if you don't have spy in the mirror match, but it can be a bit risky, especially if you're playing against like Shoop or something, because they could play Spy and Shoop, and if you don't find your Shoop or you don't find your Spy, then you might be down cards in round three, and that would just be a death sentence. Now that leads me on to the next tip, which is card advantage is super important in mirrors and wins games all the time, especially when a lot of the decks in the current meta really thrive off of having card advantage in sort of those mirror situations. Particularly Alchemy is one to think about, and to a lesser degree Shoop as well. Bruver, Shiru, that sort of thing. And the reason for that is, you've got Alchemists, which deal a lot of damage, so they need to be played after the opponent's played units, and you have Shoop and all of his nonsense, which involves a lot of damaging effects from things like the Skirmisher, the Archer, the Panther, whatever, and Shiru as well, which is going to be awkward to get off if you don't have card advantage. So yeah, in mirrors, but especially some of the matchups we see in the current meta will become redundant at some point, but whatever. Card advantage wins games. So that means a couple of things for the mirror matchups, right? The first thing is dry passing is really good because dry passing basically allows you to be playing from behind. It allows you to put on pressure by trying to push a win ahead of their card state. So you'll be a card up when you win if you out-tempo the opponent in round two after dry passing instead of being a card down doing the same on the blue coin without dry passing, right? If that makes sense. So dry passing, yeah, really good because it sometimes allows you to get card advantage if your opponent doesn't pass himself in return. So that's really nice. And yeah, the other thing is you really need to just avoid going 2 cards down at any point in mirrors. There's some slight exceptions. Maybe if you know they've got a lot of bricks on hand and you don't, then you can afford to. Or if you have literally all your finisher cards in hand and they don't have any of theirs because they've played them all or something like that, then maybe you can afford to go 2 cards down or lose on even. But generally speaking, just avoid those situations. And the third thing that it kind of means, this whole card advantage being important idea, is it's really key to try to get ahead of your opponent at key spots, right? You want to be able to force a card advantage yourself, either get 2 cards from them by putting a lot of tempo out when you're playing from behind, right? Um, either on red coin or after you've dry passed, and also just making sure you're putting them in awkward spots and making them, play cards they don't want to play or use resources they don't want to use. And this leads on to the next tip. So this is, you have to really manage your resources properly in these mirror matches. So using your stronger and weaker cards at the right point in the game is just so important for these mirrors, and people don't realize it a lot of the time, I think, especially at lower ranks. Gwent is a card game all about resource management at the end of the day, as are most card games, I suppose. But you really need to make sure you're keeping something for round 3, because that's the round that matters. That's the round that you have to win, albeit you maybe get 2-0'd or whatever. But round 3 is really important. So if you are able to make your opponent overcommit cards in a round that you don't need to win, that you can then leave, maybe round 1, maybe round 2, after you've won round 1, then you're just going to be in such a great spot, because you're going to have stronger cards than they will, just numerically, right? If you're playing a mirror match and they use their good cards and you don't, you're just going to have better cards. And similarly, if you're playing from behind, and in certain situations, if you're getting bled or whatever, you really need to play your weaker cards first, instead of, playing strong at tempo. And this is kind of a hard thing to judge. Sometimes it would be right to go and immediately catch up to your opponent. And other times it will be better to just sit back, relax, play your bad cards, and just let everything happen. Go to round 3 with a solid hand and an even card state. And it's up to your discretion a lot of the time. Depends how strong your hand is, depends if you're able to get that win on even or get a card up or whatever, from pushing a lot of tempo. Or if your hand isn't so good and you need to get rid of some bad cards, throw away some junk, then maybe you got to do that. But finding that balance and managing that skill is so important, and it's going to win you a lot of games if you can get there. Okay. And now finally I have another tip, and it's more general, but it does apply to mirrors, and it kind of links into what I was saying earlier about ointments and stuff for alchemy, right? You need to know your deck's strengths and weaknesses. I mean, in general you do, but in mirror matches it's especially important, because you're going to be able to understand why you're winning and losing against your own deck, right? Basically, you want to be using your opponent's weaknesses against them, of course, and minimizing yours. And this particularly is relevant when you're thinking about decks that have resurrect effects like great swords or alchemy, or even soldiers, or all these things that need stuff in the graveyard. That's particularly important. If you know your hand is really solid, you don't have any reses, but your opponent probably does because it's a mirror match, then you can think about 2-0ing them, or entering situations like with the dry pass or whatever that you wouldn't normally be able to do, probably against a deck that wouldn't be a mirror match, right? So yeah, just be able to keep in mind what your opponent's weaknesses are and how you can abuse them, what your strengths are, how you're going to win the game, see if you can get their win condition from them earlier in the game. That sort of thing really helps to win the mirrors. So yeah, that's kind of a rundown of all the different ways that you can kind of use to help win mirror matches in Gwent. And yeah, hope that helps some people out there. Anyhow, this is probably the last video I will do for a few days, or maybe even longer, who knows, because I am going to be playing Pro Ladder and probably won't be wanting to experiment too much with random decks. So yeah, but either way, thanks for watching very much, guys, and I will see you next time.